The ash had barely settled in King's Landing when Daenerys stood at the balcony of the Red Keep, eyes fixed on the ruins below. Her dragon, Drogon, circled above like a silent reminder of her power and fury. Jon Snow stood behind her, quiet as ever, full of guilt and fear. But someone else was on her mind, Arya Stark, the girl who had slipped through war and chaos like a ghost, the girl who had killed the Night King with no army, no dragon, just a blade and courage. Daenerys had heard Arya was in King's Landing before the city burned. She hadn't spoken to her yet. Varys had warned Daenerys about the Starks, about Arya and Sansa especially. "They will never bend the knee," he had said. "They don't trust you, and they never will." But Varys had always spoken with a politician's tongue, smooth, cold and twisted. She had listened too long to people like him, people who played games behind her back. And where had that brought her? A city in flames, a throne still out of reach, a heart that couldn't trust anyone. So she made a choice. This time she would not listen to Varys. This time she would listen to someone who had no reason to lie, someone who had nothing to gain. She sent for Arya. Arya came the next morning, dressed in black leather, her hair tied back, her face unreadable. The Unsullied hesitated to let her in, but Daenerys waved them off. She wanted to look into the eyes of the girl who could have killed her in the dark if she wanted. Instead, Arya had chosen not to. That meant something. "You're not afraid of me," Daenerys said, watching Arya carefully. Arya's voice was calm. "I've seen worse than dragons." A smirk almost tugged at Daenerys's lips. "Like what?" "Death," Arya said simply. "And I know what you are too. You're not mad. You're hurt." That hit Daenerys harder than she expected. No long speeches, no titles, just truth, raw and sharp. It made her heart ache. Arya didn't flatter her. Arya didn't pretend. And maybe that's what made her dangerous and trustworthy. Daenerys turned to face her fully. "I need someone I can trust, someone who doesn't want power, someone who sees clearly. I was told you're a killer." Arya's mouth twitched. "Depends who you ask." I'm asking," Daenerys said. "Would you kill me?" Arya didn't blink. Not today. For the first time in weeks, Daenerys laughed, just a little. Not out of joy, but from relief. She wasn't alone. Not fully. Maybe there was still a path forward. A different kind of war. One fought not just with fire, but with truth. That same day, she had Varys arrested. Not secretly, not quietly, but publicly. She made it known. Varys had plotted behind her back, tried to crown Jon Snow without her knowing. Arya stood beside her as she announced his betrayal. The lords and soldiers were confused. Wasn't Arya a Stark? But Daenerys didn't care about their confusion. She wanted loyalty built on truth, not fear. Jon, of course, didn't understand. "You trust her?" Jon, of course, didn't understand. "You trust her?" he asked later, pacing the war room. "She's my sister." "Exactly," Daenerys said. "She has no reason to lie to me. You do." Jon looked hurt, but she didn't soften. She was done being soft. The world didn't need a queen who bent like a reed. It needed one who knew which blade could cut the deepest and when to use it. Arya didn't try to advise Daenerys like Tyrion did. She didn't whisper like Varys. She just listened, watched. And when Daenerys asked questions, Arya gave answers that didn't taste like poison. When a group of Lannister loyalists were caught planning rebellion, Daenerys was ready to burn them alive. But Arya stepped in. "Make an example," Arya said, "but leave a few alive. Let them spread fear." It was smart. Cold, maybe, but smart. And it worked. Word spread fast across the Seven Kingdoms. Not just of the Queen's fire, but of her shadows. The Stark girl who could kill without being seen. The Queen who didn't need whispers because she had eyes that couldn't be fooled. A new game had begun. The wind in Dragonstone was colder than the flames that had consumed King's Landing, but Daenerys felt stronger here. She had once crossed the world to return to this land. Now she ruled it, or at least she was trying to. But ruling was not the same as conquering, and peace was proving harder to keep than war. Arya stayed close, not as a hand or advisor, but something more dangerous, a shadow in Daenerys's court that moved without being seen, spoke only when needed, and vanished before you knew she'd been there. People started calling her the Queen's Ghost. They feared her, and that was exactly what Daenerys needed. The lords who had once plotted in quiet corners now thought twice before speaking treason. Every room fell silent when Arya entered. Her presence meant someone might be listening, even if she wasn't in the room. But not everyone was afraid. Tyrion had grown distant. He didn't speak against Daenerys publicly, not anymore. But in private, he was still trying to pull Jon away from her. Jon, forever torn, still clung to honor like a sword made of paper. "She's becoming the very thing she swore to destroy," Tyrion told Jon one night. "King's Landing is ashes, and now she surrounds herself with killers." Jon didn't respond. He didn't know how. And Arya quiet, clever. Arya was already listening. She stood at the edge of the hallway, just beyond the torchlight. She didn't move, didn't breathe loud enough to be heard. When Tyrion finished whispering and Jon walked away with a face full of guilt, Arya slipped into the shadows like smoke. The next morning, Daenerys summoned Tyrion. The great hall was empty except for Arya, Daenerys, Grey Worm, and Tyrion himself. "You've had many chances," Daenerys said, her voice low, almost kind. "But you still doubt me." Tyrion stood tall, his pride refusing to bend. "I doubt any ruler who sees fear as loyalty." Daenerys gave him a sad smile. "Then you never understood me. I don't rule by fear. I survive by it." She didn't order his execution, not yet. But she stripped him of title and power. He would stay on Dragonstone under watch, alive, but irrelevant. That, Arya said later, was a far crueler punishment. Meanwhile, Sansa had grown restless in Winterfell. The North remembered, yes, but it also resented. Letters from the South carried rumors of Daenerys's cruelty, her execution squad led by Arya, the burning of traitors, the silence of dissenters. Sansa didn't believe in dragons, not the way Southerners did. She believed in control, information, fear that came in whispers, not fire. She wrote Arya a letter. "Come home. The North needs you. You're not her assassin." Arya read the letter once, then burned it. "She's testing you," Arya said to Daenerys. "She wants to see if I'm still yours, or if I belong to Winterfell." "And to you?" Daenerys asked quiet. Arya looked out at the sea, calm and endless. "I belong to no one, but I believe in you because you don't pretend to be good. You are what this world needs to survive." Daenerys had never been given that kind of loyalty before. Not from someone who had nothing to gain, not from someone who had lost everything, but enemies still moved. Sansa wasn't the only one questioning Daenerys' rise. Gendry Baratheon, now Lord of Storm's End, had begun to gather other houses who resented the destruction of King's Landing. They claimed to seek balance. Not war, but balance was just another word for rebellion. Arya was sent to Storm's End. No banners, no army, just her. She arrived like a shadow and met Gendry under the guise of diplomacy. He smiled when he saw her. His eyes softened. "You came back," he said. "I came with a warning," Arya replied coldly. "Stop this now, or I'll be back for your head." Gendry's face hardened. "This isn't about Daenerys. It's about power. And you can't kill everyone, Arya. You can't fight a kingdom." Arya leaned in, her voice like a blade. "Watch me." She didn't kill him that night. But she left his room with blood on her blade, his advisor, his spymaster, and the messenger who sent letters north. Message delivered. When Daenerys heard of Arya's silent slaughter, she didn't smile. She just nodded. The game had changed. Not with dragons, not with swords, but with silence. By the time winter crept into the bones of Westeros, Daenerys Targaryen had reshaped the Game of Thrones without sitting on the Iron Throne. There was no throne now, only ash and rubble where it once stood. But power didn't need a chair. It needed control, fear, loyalty born not of songs and stories, but of survival. Arya Stark had become more than a name. She was a warning passed between trembling lips in noble halls. She didn't wear a crown. She didn't give speeches. But her silence carried weight, heavier than any lord's sword. Her name was spoken like a curse in every castle that dared whisper rebellion, but shadows could not rule forever. Something darker had begun to stir in the north. After Arya's warning to Gendry, Daenerys assumed Storm's End would fall back in line. But instead, the north grew louder. Ravens carried cold threats. Sansa, still in Winterfell, gathered bannermen under the banner of northern independence. She spoke softly, in public careful, poised, but Arya knew her sister too well. She's not building walls to protect the north, Arya told Daenerys. She's building them to lock you out. Then she's not afraid of me anymore, Daenerys said, eyes narrowing. That's a mistake. But Arya shook her head. No, she is afraid. That's why she's moving fast. Fear breeds desperation. Jon Snow was stuck between the two women who had shaped his life, one who had once loved him and one who had once raised him. He had retreated north to speak with Sansa in person, hoping to calm things down. He returned to Dragonstone 10 days later, his face worn and tight. She's not backing down, Jon admitted. She thinks you've become another tyrant. She thinks Arya's your sword and Drogon your shield. She wants to break the wheel, not be crushed under it. Daenerys stood quiet for a long time, staring at the fire beside her. She wants independence. That's all? Jon hesitated. That's what she says. But you know how the North works. One pull and the whole realm follows. Arya said nothing, but her silence said everything. Something was coming, something bigger than rebellion, and they were running out of time. A raven arrived from the Vale the next morning. Lord Jon Royce, once neutral, had pledged his support to Sansa. The excuse was simple. The Queen has abandoned peace. The truth was clearer. Sansa had promised them a world without fire and blood. That afternoon, Arya disappeared. She didn't ask for orders. She didn't leave a message. She simply vanished, like the wind off the cliffs of Dragonstone. 3 days passed. Then a single raven came, addressed only to Daenerys. 5 words, "She's with them. Trust me." Daenerys didn't sleep that night. Her dreams were filled with faces she had burned, cities she had destroyed, lovers she had lost. When she woke, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, alone. But Arya was right. She had to trust her. Meanwhile, in Winterfell, Arya had arrived without sound or ceremony. Dressed in common clothes, face hidden beneath a borrowed look, she entered her old home not as a Stark, but as a ghost. She watched Sansa from the shadows. Her sister was not the girl she remembered. Sansa stood tall, proud, speaking with fire in her voice as she addressed her bannermen. She wasn't asking for freedom. She was demanding it. She wasn't building defenses. She was preparing for war. But Arya wasn't there to argue. She was there to listen. She slipped into war councils, overheard plans to strike first not just against Daenerys, but against the Riverlands and the Crown Lands. Alliances were forming fast. Even Dawn had begun to whisper rebellion again. Then Arya found the truth. It wasn't just Sansa. Tyrion had sent letters, dozens of them, from Dragonstone before his exile. He had begged lords to rise up, to see Daenerys as a threat before it was too late. He had called her the Fire Queen and warned that Arya was her blade of death. It was too late to stop the whispers, but not too late to kill them. Arya crept into the snow-covered Godswood that night. She sat beneath the ancient tree, breathing in the cold air, staring at the red leaves. Sansa came to her. "You're spying on me?" she asked coldly. I'm protecting you, Arya said. From yourself. Sansa's eyes narrowed. She burned a city. Are you going to wait until she burns the north too? Arya stood slowly. I've seen what war does. You think you're saving the north, but you're dragging it into a grave. They stood in silence, two sisters, two wolves, one walking in shadow, the other playing with fire. The war had not begun yet, but blood was already spilling in the snow. The snow fell heavier that night in Winterfell, covering footprints and blood with a quiet mercy. Arya walked the courtyard like a ghost, each step light, calculated. Her blade stayed hidden, but her thoughts were sharp. She had seen too much, heard too much. The North wasn't just preparing for independence. It was preparing for dependence. It was preparing for betrayal. Sansa had made her choice, and Arya had to make hers. In the shadows of the Great Hall, Arya met with Maester Woken. He was old, but clever, and more importantly, quiet. She gave him a name-only one, a man who had written one too many letters to the Vale. The Maester paled. Arya didn't explain why. She didn't need to. By morning the man would be found hanging from a tree beyond the gates, a message carved into his chest. The shadows see everything. Fear returned to Winterfell, but it wasn't from Daenerys. It was from within. Meanwhile, far to the south, Daenerys stood at the edge of a map table in Dragonstone, fingers pressed against the carved wood. News had arrived of growing unrest in the Riverlands, stirred by Sansa's quiet promises and Tyrion's old whispers. House Tully, once loyal to the crown, was considering joining the northern cause. We can't allow this to spread, Grey Worm said. We must strike now. But Daenerys hesitated. She kept looking out the narrow window toward the north, waiting for Arya, for a sign. Jon sat in silence nearby, torn as always. She's your sister, Daenerys finally said to him, and I gave her every chance. Jon didn't argue. He knew better now. Too many chances had been wasted. Too many times he had believed people would do the right thing simply because it was right. That wasn't how the game worked anymore. Daenerys turned to Grey Worm. Prepare the fleet, but we don't strike Winterfell. Not yet. We strike the Riverlands first. Cut the north off from their allies. Starve them before they can breathe. It was a cruel move, but necessary. Back in Winterfell, Arya finally met Bran. She hadn't spoken to him in months, not since the fall of the Night King. He sat as always in his chair near the Godswood, his eyes distant, seeing everything and nothing. You knew she'd do this, Arya said. Bran's voice was soft, almost sad. The pieces were already moving before the fire reached King's Landing. She's going to burn the Riverlands. Yes. Arya frowned. And Sansa will retaliate. Yes. Arya stepped closer. So what happens to the north? Bran's pale eyes met hers. That depends on you. It was no prophecy, no vision, just a truth Arya had tried to avoid. She couldn't walk away this time. She couldn't leave Westeros behind, not when her sisters were on opposite ends of a blade, not when peace was slipping further out of reach. So she made a choice, one that would risk everything. The next night she slipped into Sansa's solar. No blaze, no mask, just herself. Sansa looked up from the map of the realm, frowning. You're still here? Arya nodded. I am, and I'm asking you one last time, stop this. You sound like her, Sansa said bitterly. I sound like someone who knows what's coming, Arya snapped. You're building a war you can't win. I don't need to win. I need to survive. No, Arya said cold. You need to control, and you'll get everyone killed for it. Sansa's expression hardened. And what will you do? Kill me? For her? Arya didn't flinch. No. But if this war starts, I won't stop it either. Their silence was sharp as any blade. That night, Arya left Winterfell again, but not before leaving a message. A single sentence carved into the wood of Sansa's desk with Valyrian steel. You started this. Don't expect me to end it for you. As she rode south under moonlight, a raven flew toward Dragonstone with a single word scrawled in Arya's careful hand, "Moo." And so Daenerys did. 3 days later, fire reigned over the Riverlands, not on castles, but on supply lines, trade routes, food stores. It wasn't destruction, it was starvation, fear, pressure, the kind that made allies run and lords rethink their loyalties. And just like that, the North began to feel the cold again, not from snow, but from isolation. Winter had come. But this time, it wasn't death riding behind it, it was war. The Riverlands burned, not in wild chaos like King's Landing, but with purpose, precision. Each fire lit by the command of Daenerys Targaryen struck a different wound: grain silos, weapon forges, and key bridges along the Trident. Drogon's shadow stretched for miles, and under it, lords who once whispered rebellion now begged for silence. But Daenerys didn't take the Riverlands. She didn't want to. She wanted them to starve. Every rider that fled the flames carried the same message north: the Queen does not forget. In Winterfell, food stores began to thin. Ravens stopped coming. Trade halted. Allies from the Vale and the Westerlands hesitated, unwilling to send supplies through scorched roads. The North stood proud but isolated, and Sansa Stark, for the first time, looked uncertain. She read Arya's message over and over again. "You started this. Don't expect me to end it for you." At first she thought it was a warning. Then she realized it was worse. It was a promise. Arya had disappeared from Winterfell again, but this time she didn't go south. She went west, through the shadows, beyond the fighting. While the flames rose in the Riverlands, Arya hunted a different kind of enemy, those fueling the war from the dark. In an abandoned inn near the Neck, she slit the throat of Lord Corbury's emissary, a man caught sneaking ravens to the Vale. In Fairmarket, she poisoned the wine of 3 black market merchants feeding stolen grain to Sansa's cause. No banners, no bloodshed in the open, just silence, fear. The North whispered again, but now the whispers were different. The Queen's ghost has returned. Back in Dragonstone, Daenerys sat in a war council with Grey Worm, Missandei, and Jon. The table was surrounded by commanders, but no one dared speak without Daenerys's nod. "She hasn't surrendered," Grey Worm said. "Winterfell is holding. They always hold," Jon muttered. His voice was bitter, distant, even when it kills them. Daenerys looked at him sharply. "Do you think I'm wrong?" Jon didn't answer immediately. He looked at the map, then at her. "No, but I think you still hope they'll bend before you break them. That hope will kill you." There was silence in the room. Daenerys's expression didn't change, but her heart sank. She did hope, even now, because despite everything, she didn't want to destroy Winterfell. She wanted Sansa to surrender, to admit she had gone too far, to see the war for what it was, pride dressed in northern wool. But pride was a kind of poison. Arya knew that too well. She finally arrived at Moat Cailin, the fortress between the north and the rest of the realm. It was still held by a small Stark garrison, but Arya didn't need to fight them. She used a different face, one they would let through, a face she had worn once before, a young girl from Braavos, broken and lost. Inside, she found what she was looking for: a man, bald, fat, trembling as he packed scrolls into a bag. He was no fighter, no lord, just a whisperer, a spider in the walls. He didn't recognize Arya until it was too late. "You were feeding her lies," Arya said coldly. "You told her she could win. You fed her pride like meat to a starving dog." It was just politics," the man stammered. "You don't understand." Arya plunged the dagger in so fast he didn't finish the sentence. "I understand enough." She left the scrolls untouched. Let them rot in his blood. Let anyone who found him wonder why he had been silenced. When she rode south again, her mind was clear, but time was running out. Daenerys had sent one final raven to Winterfell. A simple offer. Surrender before the next full moon, or I will end this with fire. Sansa received the letter in her solar. She read it once, then twice. She stared out her window. Snow fell, quiet and soft, but she didn't feel cold. She felt surrounded. She looked to Bran, who sat near the fire, watching her with those blank, all-seeing eyes. "If I surrender," she said, "I lose the North." Bran blinked slowly. "If you don't, you may lose more than that." Sansa clenched her jaw. "Then I suppose I'll lose everything." She turned back to her table, where maps lay curled like war was just a game. And far away, across a sea of snow and fire, Daenerys stood at the edge of Dragonstone's cliffs, watching the sky, waiting for Arya, waiting for war. The last raven never came. Daenerys waited as the days passed, eyes locked on the sea like it would carry answers in its waves. The full moon rose over Dragonstone like a glowing blade in the sky, but no surrender came from the north. No banner of peace, no white flag, only silence. And silence meant war. At dawn, Daenerys stepped into the open courtyard. The wind was bitter, biting, yet she felt no cold. Drogon stood perched on the blackened cliffs above, wings stretched wide. His growl echoed through the rocks, a sound not of rage, but of readiness. The army was assembled. The Unsullied stood in perfect ranks. The Dothraki, fewer than before but fiercer than ever, tightened their saddles and sharpened their blades. Jon Snow mounted his horse in silence, eyes full of dread. He hadn't seen Arya in weeks. Her absence haunted him more than the looming war. She had left as a ghost and hadn't returned. "I never thought it would come to this," he muttered to Daenerys. She looked at him, not with softness, but with finality. "It always comes to this. People like us don't get peace. We make it for others." The march began that day. By the time the army crossed the neck, Arya had returned on foot, soaked in mud and blood, her face pale from exhaustion. She arrived at Daenerys' camp just as the fires were being lit. "You're late," Daenerys said, eyeing her. "Was it worth it?" Arya nodded. "The whispers are dying. The lords that supported Sansa are either backing away or dead." Daenerys didn't smile, but her eyes burned with approval. "Then we finish this." Arya hesitated. "You'll have to take Winterfell by force. She won't surrender." "I know, but you should also know." Arya stepped closer. "Sansa's dug in deep. She's turned Winterfell into a trap." "I have dragons," Daenerys said flatly. Arya's voice was low, serious. "She has Bran." That name silenced everything. Daenerys turned slowly. "The boy?" Arya shook her head. "He's not just a boy. He's the three-eyed raven. He sees things we don't. And she's using him, not as a weapon, worse, as a shield. You burn Winterfell, you burn him too." Daenerys stared at the firelight dancing in the sky. She had burned cities, tyrants, armies, but this was different. Burning Bran would not just kill a Stark, it would kill the living memory of Westeros. And in doing so, Sansa would twist the world against her forever. "She's clever," Daenerys whispered. "No," Arya said. "She's desperate." "No," Arya said. "She's desperate." That night, Arya slipped away again, but not to kill. This time, she went to talk. Alone, she crept into Winterfell, past guards too cold and tired to notice. She moved through the crypts, through secret tunnels only a Stark would know. She found Sansa in the war room, pacing alone, wrapped in furs. "You shouldn't be here," Sansa said, startled. "I had to see you," Arya replied. Sansa frowned. "You're still on her side. I'm on the side that ends this war before it kills us all." Sansa's voice sharpened. "She burned the Riverlands, Arya. She's coming to destroy us." Arya stepped closer. "She's coming to end this. She gave you every chance. You turned peace into pride." Sansa's hands trembled slightly. "She's not a queen. She's a conqueror." "She's both," Arya said. And if you don't stop, you'll make her into something worse." Sansa looked down at the map. Her voice dropped. "Bran told me things. He said the fire ends at Winterfell, one way or another." Arya narrowed her eyes. "Did he say you had to die for it to stop?" Sansa looked up, shocked. "No, of course not." "Then listen to him," Arya said, "or I'll stop this myself." Sansa didn't answer. Arya turned and vanished back into the tunnels. But before leaving, she stopped near Bran's chamber. She stood in the doorway, just for a moment. He looked at her, eyes wide and ancient. "You always return to the place where it began," he said. Arya whispered, "And maybe I'll die there too." Bran blinked. "Not yet." By dawn, Daenerys' army reached the edge of the north. The snows deepened. The wind screamed through the trees. The walls of Winterfell stood tall, unmoving, like a frozen defiance. But something had shifted. Ravens flew in all directions. The Lords of the Vale began to pull back. House Glover closed its gates. The Karstarks refused to send men. Fear had begun to rot Sansa's alliance from the inside, and Arya had returned, this time with no message, only a question for Daenerys. "Are you ready to break her without breaking the North?" Daenerys looked toward the horizon, toward the walls of Winterfell rising through the snow like teeth. "If she doesn't kneel by sunrise," Daenerys said coldly, "then Winterfell falls." The sun rose blood orange over the snowy fields outside Winterfell. A thin mist clung to the air, turning the battlefield into a ghostly plain. Both armies stood in silent formation. No horns, no drums, just breath and cold steel. Daenerys sat atop Drogon, eyes locked on the walls of the castle she had once considered her allies' home. Now it stood as the last resistance to her reign. She wore no crown, no armor, just a cloak of black, her hair whipping in the wind, face unreadable. Beside her, Jon Snow tightened his grip on the reins of his horse. He looked up at the walls where Sansa might be watching. 1,000 thoughts ran through him, but none he could speak. He had already chosen a side. The moment he followed Daenerys to the north, he chose. Below, Grey Worm gave the signal. A single rider under a white banner rode to Winterfell's gates. His voice rang out, "This is your final chance. Bend the knee, open the gates, or face fire." No answer. Moments passed, like years. And then the gates creaked open, not for surrender, for Bran. Pushed in his chair by Maester Woken, Bran Stark rolled into the space between the armies, alone, a strange cider boy in silence. In the middle of death, Daenerys narrowed her eyes. "What is this?" Arya stepped forward, whispering, "She's using him, just like I warned." Bran stopped halfway. He looked directly at Daenerys, Drogon behind her, flames licking the air. "I did not come for mercy," Bran said loudly, "only to speak the truth." The soldiers shifted. The wind seemed to pause. "The fire ends here," he continued. "You can burn Winterfell, but you'll burn something older than this war. Something even your dragons can't kill." Daenerys stared down. "And what is that?" Bran tilted his head. "The story of Westeros. Burn me, and you burn the world's memory. You will be queen of ash and dust, and nothing more." The words struck harder than any sword. Daenerys felt something stir in her chest. Guilt, doubt, or just exhaustion. Jon looked at her. "He's right." She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Arya. "Will she surrender?" Arya's voice was cold. "No." "And will you kill her if I command it?" The question hung heavy in the frozen air. Arya didn't flinch. "I will do what must be done." Daenerys looked down at Bran again. "And if I don't strike now, what stops her from rising again? What stops her from turning every house in the north against me?" Bran blinked slowly. "Fear does not last, but death does." Jon stepped forward. "Then let her live. Let the north go, if you must. Keep the rest. You've already won everywhere else." Daenerys didn't move. Drogon growled beneath her, sensing her hesitation. Flames built in his throat. Arya's hand brushed the hilt of her blade. Then Bran spoke again. She wants to fight because she doesn't know how to stop. But if you kill her, she becomes a martyr. If you let her live, she becomes irrelevant. The logic was cruel, clean, and true. Daenerys finally exhaled. She raised her hand. Drogon stopped. The fire in his throat faded. The army behind her remained tense, but Daenerys' voice rang out, "I will not burn Winterfell." There was a gasp from the northern side. Some relief, some disbelief. "But," she continued, louder now, "Sansa Stark is no longer Warden of the North. She is exiled forever. If she sets foot beyond the wall or sends ravens of rebellion again, she will be named enemy of the realm." Jon closed his eyes. Arya lowered her hand. Bran nodded once. "That is enough." But it wasn't over. That night, inside the great hall of Winterfell, Arya came to her sister's chambers. No blades, just silence. Sansa stood by the window, watching the fires of the camp flicker in the distance. "You forced her hand," Arya said softly. "I was protecting the North," Sansa replied. "She would have never stopped." "She did," Arya said, "because of Bran, because of you being just threatening enough to scare her, but not enough to be worth killing." Sansa turned, tears in her eyes. "Did I lose everything?" Arya looked at her long and hard. "No. You still have Winterfell. You still have me, but don't ever put me in that position again." Sansa nodded, but her eyes spoke of defeat, a kind she had never tasted before. By morning, Daenerys' army pulled back. Drogon took to the skies, and the Queen of Ashes became, for the first time, a queen of restraint. But Arya knew the peace would not last, because the war was not over. Not yet. Not while the throne remained empty. Winterfell stood, but not as it once had. The snow-covered walls were intact, the people alive, but something inside the castle had cracked. Power, pride. Whatever had once driven Sansa Stark to defy Daenerys Targaryen had been stripped away, piece by piece. She remained in her chambers, receiving no visitors, sending no ravens. She spoke only when necessary, and even then her words were cold, measured-like. She was speaking from a grave she hadn't yet been buried in. Arya watched her from the shadows. Winterfell had not burned, but something inside it had. In the south, Daenerys returned to Dragonstone not in triumph, but in silence. She had won, yes, but the taste of victory felt hollow. She had stood on the edge of fire and pulled back. The North had not knelt, yet it had fallen in its own way, and she hadn't needed to kill a Stark to make it happen. Still, the realm was uneasy. The veil wavered in silence. The Stormlands watched carefully. Whispers of the uncrowned queen spread across taverns and keeps. No throne, no coronation, just a woman with a dragon, a reputation, and a trail of ash behind her. Jon Snow rode with her but spoke less each day. He spent hours watching the sea. "Do you regret it?" he asked her one. Daenerys stared into the flames of the fireplace. "Regret what? Sparing Winterfell or becoming this?" Jon didn't answer, because he knew both questions were the same. But something else stirred beneath the surface. Power didn't just vanish. When you burn the weeds of rebellion, the roots remain. In the shadows of the realm, a new conspiracy had begun. One born not of swords or dragons but words. Tyrion Lannister, exiled and quiet, was not idle. He had spent months on the Light Guard in a tower of Dragonstone, too respected to kill, too dangerous to trust. But he had pens, he had ink, and he had a memory sharper than any sword. He had written a book, a simple one, The Fire That Consumes, the Truth of Queen Daenerys. It painted her not as a tyrant, but as a necessary evil, a breaker of wheels, a woman forced to become flame in order to survive the cold of Westeros. But more importantly, it planted doubt about her mercy, her restraint, her future. He sent it in pieces to key houses, masked as fictional tales. But fiction, as he knew, often told the greatest truths. And people began to talk. Back in Winterfell, Bran called Arya to him. He no longer spoke in riddles. His voice had grown stronger, more human. "She will never be queen," he told Arya plainly. Arya frowned. "You saw that?" Bran nodded. "I see the throne still empty. I see her in fire, surrounded by stone. I see a knife at her back, and it's not yours." Arya's blood ran cold. "Then who?" Bran only blinked. "That's why I need you to return." "Return where?" "Return where?" "To her." Arya hadn't planned to go back. She had thought Winterfell would be her end. But now she felt it again, that pull, that instinct that something wasn't finished. When she arrived at Dragonstone under cover of night, Daenerys met her with tired eyes. "I didn't expect you," she said. Arya studied her. "You should have." Daenerys turned to face the sea. "I spared your sister. I ended the war. Why do I still feel like I'm losing?" Arya said nothing for a while. Then finally, because the game didn't end, it just changed. Together, they walked the cliffs where the sky met the sea. The wind howled. "You will never sit on the throne," Arya said gently. Daenerys stiffened. "And you've come to kill me now?" "No." Arya's voice was calm. "I've come to stop the one who will." Behind them, a raven flew toward King's Landing, not bearing the Targaryen sigil, but a lion's. Tyrion Lannister's words were spreading, and somewhere deep in the heart of the realm, those words had found purchase in someone hungry, patient, and cruel, someone with no dragon, no crown, just a knife and a dream. Daenerys turned to Arya. "Then we fight again?" Arya nodded slowly. "Always." They stood there, side by side, two women the realm had underestimated. One's shadow, not friends, not enemies, just survivors, because peace was never the end, only the eye of a storm yet to come.